It's a great pleasure. This is going to be a very interesting panel. We have a combination of U.S. government official in the form of Deputy Administrator Don Steinberg, Alec Ross, who's Secretary Clinton's senior advisor on innovation and one of the most creative people probably the U.S. government has ever known. Sam Gregory from Witness, John Hutson from the Satellite Sentinel Project. John, I hope you heard the shout out that you got in the president's speech today, the reference to satellites and all the new tools being used by the advocates. And of course, Ben Keesey from Invisible Children. So this is a veritable dream team, and we also have a number of technology gurus and innovators in the audience as well. Feel free to take bathroom breaks and so forth, because we didn't build in breaks because we wanted to maximize the content. So just come and go as you choose. But again, this should be a great panel. And just to preview again, we're going to go to the Africa panel thereafter, specifically on Sudan and the LRA. And then we're very fortunate that Ben Rhodes, who's the President's Deputy National Security Advisor and the head of strategic communications here, has worked with the President on some of the best speeches that you've seen the President give over the years. He'll be with us as well as our closing speaker. Thank you.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Samantha. I am Alec Ross. I'm Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's Senior Advisor for Innovation. And since we are focused on modern technologies, social media and the like, we are going to try to act in the spirit of those interactive medium. And instead of having opening statements from the panel, what we're going to have is just maximum 2-3 sentence introductions of themselves and of their organization. And then we're going to get right into it. We're going to begin with questions, take questions from you, take questions from social media. And so with that, if I could turn first to John.
Thanks, Alex. I'm Alec. I'm the Director of Communications for the Enough Project, which focuses on ending genocide and crimes against humanity. I'm also a spokesperson for the Satellite Sentinel Project, which is led by the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative, Digital Globe, and the Enough Project. And it's the world's first early warning system for human rights and human security.
And hi, everyone. I'm Ben Keesey with Invisible Children. It's an honor to be here. Invisible Children started when our founders met an amazing woman named Jolie, who's sitting in the front row. And when they got to know a boy named Jacob, who's sitting in the back row. So it's great to be alongside them today. That was 9 years ago, and since then, Invisible Children's been on the quest to both make the atrocities of the LRA known and then contribute towards their end.
Hi, my name's Sam Gregory, and I'm the Program Director for Witness. We help people use video for human rights. We work worldwide, thinking how do you enable people to create, share, and use videos in ways that are ethical, safe, and impactful. And I run our Cameras Everywhere initiative, which thinks now that millions of people have the tools in their hands, usually cell phones, to document human rights, how do we turn that into genuine political change?
And I'm Don Steinberg. I've already introduced myself, but the one thing you have to know about me is I'm probably the least tech-savvy person in this entire room. But the beauty is that I've surrounded myself with people who really know how to use technology for this purpose.
It's never too late, Don.
It is in my case.
Oh, no. I mean, come on, Secretary Clinton is texting. So let's dive right into things. So we are talking about modern tools for ongoing challenges, yet a lot of the places we're talking about geographically are not necessarily places that we think of principally in terms of their connectedness, in terms of having 21st century infrastructure. So if I could ask Sam Gregory from Witness first, if I could ask you the first question. Sam, is there an implicit limitation to the effectiveness of digital tools in preventing or responding to mass atrocities when the place where the atrocities might be taking place is someplace that might be not as connected elsewhere, like the Central African Republic or the East Congo or what have you?
I think this is really a question about which tools we're using and also about what we're expecting they'll do. And if we think about genocide prevention or mass atrocity prevention, there's 4 things we want to do. We want to prevent it happening. We want to mobilize people to take action against it. We want to warn people who are maybe in communities nearby about the risk, and we want to hold people accountable. And I can talk about the experience within my own work of working with groups in Eastern Congo and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where there's not huge amounts of data. So there may only be small amounts of, in the case of my work, video. But when used appropriately and shifted out of the networks It can be used very effectively to mobilize people internationally, to put pressure in the case of the work we were doing on the International Criminal Court, to follow up on the case of Thomas Lubanga, a DRC warlord, and also to hold people accountable. So I think that's a starting point. I also think we need to think about the range of technology and recognize the importance of SMS and very basic cell phone networks as a way of connecting with people, particularly when they're connected to radio. And I know Invisible Children has done really great work around that with the LRA Crisis Tracker. And then I think the thing that's really important is to look ahead really and think about how quickly this is changing. So even in places that feel like they have low connectivity now, that is shifting very rapidly. So in 6 months last year, there were 350,000 $80 cell phones, smartphones sold in Kenya, produced by a Chinese manufacturer, Huawei. The predictions are that it will be a 36 times increase in mobile data traffic in the Middle East and Africa in the next 5 years. So I think we need to start thinking ahead to how we're going to turn the documentation that will come out of the places we currently think of as unconnected into information that will generate political action and political will, and look ahead and be really ready for that.
That's terrific. Thank you. Let me turn now to Benjamin Keesey. Benjamin, one of the best known examples of using technology and social media and video specifically as an amplifier for awareness around mass atrocities is the work that your organization recently did with producing the Coney videos. Could you tell us how many people actually watch those videos first? And secondly, so a lot of people, you're going to give us a number, but I already know it's a big number. So what would you say it actually accomplished?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Well, our goal was for 500,000 people to watch it.
You hit that goal, didn't you?
We did, rather quickly, very unexpectedly.
Yeah.
You know, and I think even before I talk about the amount of people that saw it, the goal was to introduce the story of the LRA to a new audience. And for the main purpose of this, President Obama said it, I wrote it down. He said that there is bigotry that says this: another person is less than equal to me and less than human. These are the seeds of hate. And I think since the beginning of Invisible Children, that's been one thing that's changed our lives as individuals, and that's through film what we want to share with the world, that human beings have inherent value and should be treated equally. And so when we made Coney 2012, our goal is for 500,000 people to get that message. Now, here 6 weeks later, it's been about 140 million around the world. And of that, over 3.5 million have signed on to a pledge that says they're asking their world leaders to unite, come together to end the atrocities of the LRA. And what we've seen is when the people respond, policymakers follow. That's the belief that the sequence starts with awareness, and that goes to informed action. And the president's announcement today that they're renewing their commitment for the broad and comprehensive strategy that the United States is helping towards, helping the regional effort. Just one example of how we as citizens, we as young people, we as every element of society, we have a role to play, and our voices can be heard.
Terrific, thank you. Don Steinberg, you and I are bookending innovation here. We are the two guys from government, and sitting between you and I are three individuals and three institutions that are all notable for having innovated using information communications technology tools from within civil society. So given the degree to which connection technologies have become powerful tools within this space, what is the appropriate role for government? How should government adapt, especially in the face of so much of the innovation coming from the NGO sector?
We need to recognize that we have a very specific role in this exercise. We have diplomatic pressure that we can bring to bear to facilitate the entry of social communication. We have convening authority that we can be using. We can reduce the risks. We can use our diplomacy in order to open up space for the activities that we're seeing here. When I come to this space, I look at what we've done in the area of prevention of natural disasters, where we have been very aggressive. We have a tool at USAID called FuseNet, where we use geospatial technology, we use digital communications. We use a variety of methods to try to anticipate where the next disaster is going to occur from an ecological and drought standpoint. We need to be applying those same sorts of tools in this space. And so, for example, we are working with a number of our colleagues on the table to actually build solar towers for cell phones in the regions of low conductivity. And that what that's going to do in the Eastern Central African Republic and in the Congo is to give those literally 6 billion cell phones around the world greater connectivity to tell us earlier on where we should be putting our ounce of prevention.
That's fantastic, and I think this is consistent with a lot of the direction that USAID is heading in, which is elevating innovation within development. That's impressive. Let me turn to John Hutson from the Satellite Sentinel project. You guys have taken a decades-old technology in satellite imaging, and you've applied it in a completely new way. Could you tell us what you're doing?
Well, we're certainly standing on the shoulders of giants. Others before us have used satellite technology in the human rights arena, notably Amnesty International and Eyes on Darfur project, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. Others have done that before. But our killer app, Alec, was not the technology. As you said, it's decades old. It's really collaboration. It's getting the private sector, a company like Google, academia, Harvard Humanitarian Initiative, and a commercial satellite firm, Digital Globe, to collaborate with us, NGO activists at the Enough Project, to build this early warning system for human rights and human security. One of the key challenges for the U.S. intelligence community is sharing information in teams. Even in the same building, people tend to have a lot of siloing of information, right? And it's hard to get information quickly shared between team members, even in the same agency, and even more difficult between agencies, and even more difficult between the U.S. government and our allies. So one of the advantages that we have at the Satellite Sentinel project is the use of commercial satellite imagery, which the beauty of that is it's unclassified, so you can share it with anyone very quickly. We can transparently share in near real time high-resolution commercial satellite imagery of emerging crises on the expectation that better, faster imagery makes for stronger, faster responses to emerging crises around the world.
So let me ask a follow-up question to that, and then we're going to take a question from Twitter. And as a reminder, ask your questions using the hashtag WHChat. One follow-up question, though, John. The key asset that you are talking about is intelligence. It's information. Could there be any unintended consequences of your publishing this information? Could dictators use your images or your information for their own purposes?
Absolutely. Dictators quickly adapt to the new tools and technologies, and we must expect and counter-adapt to their use of technology as well. Twitter and Facebook have been used by student leaders in the Arab Spring. They've also been used by dictators in places like the Assad regime in Syria or the Khartoum regime in Sudan to entrap youth leaders and to expose networks. And we do have a responsibility to say that because we're engaged in crisis mapping and the fusion of satellite imagery along with sources from the ground, eyewitnesses, we have to know that we're dealing with populations who are at risk of being arrested, beaten, tortured, or worse. And so we have to be honest with ourselves and say, just because our intentions are pure doesn't mean that we couldn't create some unintended risks for the populations whom we're trying to help. There's a real need to develop in the crisis mapping community standards of ethics and professionalism. Some of our colleagues at Harvard Humanitarian Initiative and Harvard Carr Center for Human Rights Policy are very interested in engaging the entire crisis mapping community to develop such standards and professional ethics and accountability mechanisms to address those very real concerns.
Yeah, so you're saying that brings two things immediately to mind. One is something that Secretary Clinton has said about technology generally. She says, Our information networks are like nuclear power. They can fuel a city or destroy it. And the second thing that occurs to me is exactly that which you described is a lot of which propelled the issuance of the President's executive order today, which is recognizing that the same technologies that can be allowed to facilitate the free flow of information can also be used to surveil one's people, can also be used to oppress one's people. So I think the points that you made very compellingly undergird a lot of the thinking that went into the President's executive order today. So a question from Twitter from Don Verderosa. How can social media photos and video be used in a legal context to prosecute and prevent atrocities? We'd like to step up to that. Sam?
I think this is a really important question because it goes to how we respond to what citizens do for themselves to try and challenge and document atrocities and to secure accountability. And I know it's come up in the context of the ICC investigations in Libya, is all this citizen shot footage of what went on and how that can play a role in a potential trial there. At the moment, it's quite complicated. Citizen social media hasn't had a very prominent place for in the ways we prosecute in war crimes tribunals and at the International Criminal Court. And I think it's really somewhere where we need to make an effort. Otherwise, we're going to be putting in front of people this opportunity and saying, look, you can document, you have the tools, we want your voice to be heard, but we're then going to exclude it from the space where accountability is secured. My own organization is working on ways to address that. We've been working on tools that think about how the data you gather on a cell phone meets evidentiary requirements. And I think there's a lot of initiative that can be taken in this area to really think how we transfer and turn citizen action and agency into the types of information that will also fit in formal processes like war crimes tribunals.
Fascinating. Why don't we turn to the audience now? I see in this audience there are a lot of digital natives. So I anticipate that there are a lot of good observations and good questions that would come from this audience. So why don't we turn directly to the audience?
Hi there. I'm Sanjay Kishore. I'm here with my friends from Duke University today. Just want to say thanks for coming out. So my question is related to technology. You know, as students, we realize that social media and videos, they're awesome in terms of the 21st century fighting for atrocity prevention. All you need is a flip cam to make an impact, right? I think that what we've also realized is, you know, with that great power comes a great responsibility. As Daniel Solomon mentioned earlier, we students need to sort of shift the narrative to emphasize empathy, not sympathy. I guess question maybe directed to you, Mr. Keesey, in terms of with the Coney 2012 campaign, there's been a lot of lessons learned in the past 6 weeks in terms of using narratives, how we use narratives for atrocity prevention. Number one, first question is, what do you think Invisible Children, your organization, has learned? Is there anything about your narrative you would change given the conversation that's happened over the past 6 weeks? And number two, given the organic nature of social media now, how do we emphasize responsible narratives for students all across the country, you know, at the grassroots level?
Yeah, great questions. Thank you. Well, I think one thing that we've learned is, and again, I would say it, I said at the beginning, we in this room maybe take it for granted that we live in a society that most people value human life around the world. And I think we're still, that movement is still growing, right? So I think part of the purpose and the way that we think about things when we're building, you know, films or campaigns at Invisible Children, how do we tell that most basic story? The most basic story of the equality of human life, the value of human life, and the global human connection, right? So that's a part of our thinking. Now, to answer your question about what have we learned over these last 6 weeks, gosh, I mean, I could spend hours because it's been such an intense time. One thing that we learned is it's really hard to have a global audience. You know, when you're speaking to one audience, you're able to, in your short amount of time, having a message with them, have that message be very appropriate. But what we saw with Coney 2012 was, you know, it started in the U.S., it started primarily with, you know, young people, and it spread all around the world. So having an audience that's, or a narrative that's relevant towards a global community is more difficult. One thing that, one specific thing that we learned was having the story of a war survivor there right after the film, which is the model for most of our screenings. They're usually done in like high school gyms or a college gymnasium where when the movie ends, a war survivor stands up and speaks. That's such a powerful model, and we want to figure out a way to do that if and when we do another online campaign in the same format. So I think if that answers your question, in terms of the social media question, I think it's been amazing to see, as a result of the film, young people that are now, messaging their member of Congress, messaging their parliament. And a little secret to all of us that have been on Twitter and Facebook for a long time, there's still a lot of United States senators who maybe have 1,000 or 1,500 Twitter followers because they're really new at it. So if you send them a message and they're handling their account personally, they will see it. And I think using social media has been a big way that, in the 6 weeks since the movie launched, young people have gotten, members of Congress in this country to introduce. There's been 7 pieces of legislation introduced related to the LRA in the last 6 weeks. And, 2 of the main resolutions now have over 100 co-sponsors in the House and Senate in a bipartisan way. So they're powerful tools, and when we use them, your voice can get heard very directly, very quickly.
Thank you. Let's continue with questions from the audience. And again, if you are watching the live stream and you have questions that you'd like to ask through Twitter, it is #WHChat. Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name's Ben Brockman. I'm a student at the University of Pennsylvania and a former State Department intern. So I think it's one of the great things about today is we have a number of folks from government, but also from civil society. And I was wondering, this is for everyone on the panel, how can we keep this conversation going and utilize the Atrocity Prevention Board to keep all of these groups and conversations going between the civil society folks and the government folks, maybe using the Prevention Board as kind of this mechanism where it can serve as a meeting place. So for the civil society folks, what are you looking for in the government to better engage? And on the flip side, for the USAID gentlemen and State Department, how can we better connect with civil society to keep those connections and conversations going on these?
Great, thank you. Why don't we start with the board member, with Mr.
Sure.
Steinberg, and work our way down?
Well, the beauty is that 2 years ago, many of the people who are on the Atrocity Prevention Board were in civil society. So Samantha and I both played a part, for example, in the USIP Holocaust Museum study on the prevention of genocide. And now we're having the chance to implement what we're doing. One of the key things that we said at that point was that no one has a monopoly on good ideas, no one has a monopoly on financial resources, no one has a monopoly on ground truth, and no one clearly has a monopoly on moral authority in this space. And so one of the things we built into the Atrocity Prevention Board are regular consultations with civil society, and not just in this kind of a setting, but sitting down in a room at the White House and saying, okay, what is going on in Eastern Congo? What are the ideas that you have about how we go after the LRA now that it is so amorphous? What can we be doing more in the Syria situation? And again, these are worked into the official guidelines of the Atrocities Prevention Board, and we will be back in touch with you about what the procedures will be.
I'm excited to see how the board works. Let me put two thoughts out that go to the role of technology, particularly in this, and to the stakeholders in the government, but also in the technology community, so the technology companies. Because I think a lot of what can happen in terms of genocide prevention can come out of citizen will, our use of the tools we have at hand, but those two stakeholders have a huge sway in our ability to use them effectively at a global and a national level. And so I would be excited to see an interaction between the board and the work that, for example, I know Alec has been leading with Secretary of State Clinton around internet freedom and keeping the mobile infrastructure free. It's no good if people have the ability to communicate with it to each other in their communities, to document if that can get shut off at a moment's notice and people don't have that ability to share information. It's going to really cripple our efforts at a local level, particularly as we anticipate more citizens moving in this direction. So that's one thing at the government level. And then the second level is the role of the technology companies. I know there's some representatives here from Google and Facebook, and I encourage them, and I know they are ready to think about their role in enabling the freedom of expression that allows people to document, to share, and to mobilize around a lot of human rights issues, but obviously at the most critical moments around mass atrocities. So really thinking about how they enable that space for people who are in critical, challenging situations to do that. Those two stakeholders acting in that way will enable civil society to do what it does really well, which is to self-organize, to act, to challenge abuses that are going on around them.
Very good. Why don't we take one more question from Twitter, and then we will go back to the audience. A question from Twitter from Andrew Kirshner. He asks, is using technology to raise awareness enough? How can we further these tools as a medium for change? Who'd like to step up to that?
I could make a quick comment. I think it goes in line with one of your earlier comments about how does digital and technology work in areas that aren't as connected as places in the West. And I think we've seen with our work in Central African Republic and the DRC that if there can be a fusion between low-tech and high-tech, there can be a really strong partnership. So one quick example is there's a man named Abbé Benoit who leads a parish in the DRC that's really affected by LRA violence, and they had a system of a really low-tech radio network using HF radios. You know, it's like basically a high-powered walkie-talkie bounces off the ionosphere. And we were able to support that and fund the rehabilitation of some of these radios and then pull that through Salesforce, a database, to be able to publish that to the web. So I think it takes that appropriate use of low-tech to high-tech partnerships to bring some of this stuff from the physicalized world to the digital world.
I would say that beyond awareness, we need to move toward accountability, and technology can help do things such as track assets owned or controlled by regime members of dictatorial regimes. And at the Satellite Sentinel project, we're interested in moving from awareness to accountability in terms of gathering evidence and documenting evidence of mass atrocities to a standard that it could be introduced at a war crimes trial in The Hague. And so, we interview people who are eyewitnesses to mass killings and mass graves. We corroborate that with, in many cases, on-the-ground photos, videos, documents, and the commercial satellite imagery donated generously by Digital Globe. But for us, it's not just about awareness, it's about focusing awareness toward that accountability moment.
Great. Mr. Steinberg.
In our development side of the house, we've found that the innovative ideas of students and researchers around America has yielded incredible benefits. We know that students at MIT sitting around their dorm rooms have come up with solutions to take arsenic out of groundwater. Some kids at UCLA came up with a solution to find how to use a telephone to do testing for malaria instantaneously. There's a 17-year-old girl who spoke here at the White House who came up with a solution for finding where landmines are in the ground. And I know, because I was the president's advisor for fighting landmines, that we spent millions of dollars through DARPA trying to replicate the nose of a dog, trying to get bees to tell us where the landmines were. Well, we should have just asked this 17-year-old who came up with the answer.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that the president announced today was a tech challenge for atrocity prevention. And what this means, working with Humanity United, USAID has put together a challenge to all of you to come up with that next solution. And you'll be financially rewarded for it. It's a very generous tech award. But we want you to come up with the solutions and tell us, how can you, for example, I talked before about the problem with Rwanda. Well, there were people doing broadcasts in Rwanda over Mille Collines, calling out for people to go and attack. And we sat trying to analyze that. Well, we now have digital voice recognition techniques. How can you apply that as we start listening to what they're saying in the rural areas of the DRC or Cote d'Ivoire or whatever? So that's the first challenge that we've issued. But we have another challenge, which is a grand challenge for development, where over the course of the next 8 months, we are going to be going out to businesses around the country, to NGOs, back to the universities, saying, put your best minds on this issue, and not only will you get, quote, a prize, but you will get funding to take the project that you're talking about to scale in terms of preventing genocide all around the world. This couldn't be a higher priority for us.
That's fabulous. Thank you. So we have 4 or 5 minutes left. So why don't we take the remaining time to gather, a handful of questions from the audience, and rather than responding to them individually, we'll collect them up and then allow the panelists to have a final word each, responding to those questions, which you can within the constraints of time. So if we could start first in the back. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, last year, my name is Janice Kaminer-Resnick from Jewish World March, a Los Angeles-based grassroots anti-genocide organization. Last year, as part of the Dodd-Frank legislation, there was a piece of legislation about conflict minerals in Congo. And I'm wondering, because it seems like the implementation of that provision, which talked about auditing the minerals from that are used for all of our digital devices. It seems like the implementation will be delayed because the SEC has not yet promulgated the regulations or released the regulations in terms of how that audit will be done. And I'm wondering if any of you in the tech world have begun to figure out a way that through private resourcefulness, we could figure out a way to audit the minerals to ascertain which minerals are coming from the illicitly mined locations in Congo.
Thank you.
Well, at the Enough Project, we've been talking with the private sector, with companies like Apple or Hewlett-Packard or Motorola, about ways to trace, audit, and certify supply chains to free them of the conflict minerals that fuel ongoing mass atrocities in eastern Congo. And we're also very engaged with civil society leaders from groups on the ground in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, to get their solutions about how to not just clean up the supply chains, but also have alternative livelihoods for artisanal miners who are displaced by the interruption of the conflict minerals trade that's putting guns in the hands of warlords. How do we give them alternative livelihoods, other ways to make a sustainable living that is treating them fairly, to have a safe job, and that pays a living wage?
Thank you, John. Other questions from the audience? Yes, ma'am. Right here in the middle. And what we'll do is we will take this question, then one more, and then we'll go back to the panel. So yes, ma'am.
My name is Ali Cooper-Ponte. I'm also a student at the University of Pennsylvania. And the Coney 2012 video was something that we've been discussing a lot on campus. And one of the issues that sort of came up was while social media is a very sort of democratic platform, when we talk about developed countries, a lot of people are sort of involved on social media. On a global scale, there seems to be a real sort of exclusion of voices in developing countries simply because they don't have access to these platforms. And in addition, one of the sort of interesting phenomena that happens with social media is that there's no real sort of scrutiny or sort of like way of sort of evaluating the merits of videos that go viral. The strangest things go viral on the internet. And I guess sort of my question for the panel was, how should we think about sort of accountability in terms of social media and sort of understanding that not all voices are sort of equally represented on these platforms, and some of the voices that we should be listening to aren't really sort of able to speak out on these platforms.
Thank you. And final question in the back. Yes, ma'am. If we could just wait real quick for the microphone so that we can hear you on the internet.
Hi, I'm Angie Hong from Towson University, and I came with the Resolve. I had a question, and also, Mr. Steinberg, I joined you in the Less Tech Savvy group. I'm 21, and I still don't really get Twitter, which was one of the most basic social media works. But on top of that, I guess it leads to my next question of, do you think social media can work too fast where it comes to a human issue? There's less human interaction in terms of people going on the internet, posting blogs, and when I think that's great, I think it's also hard now to kind of go to your next door neighbor and talk about these issues. And so are there any ways with social media that you hope to use that and create more personal interactions? And I know Invisible Children uses the roadies and makes them come to the screenings and talk, but I just think that it's kind of discouraging with the social media with human interactions.
Thank you. So I think there's actually a common theme in between those two questions because they really go at the core of the question of accountability and efficacy. So if we could, Sam, why don't we start with you? And if we could have just very short responses, we'll transition from this to our final panel on Sudan.
I think of it as two questions. As one, which I hope is a relatively short-term one, which is there is a disparity at the moment in who gets heard on in social media, which excludes the voices often from the places where human rights abuses are happening. I think there's a really important role now for spaces that amplify that and really do their best to make sure those voices are heard if we're thinking internationally. I have a huge respect for websites like Global Voices. Witness itself tries to do similar things. Has been working on a human rights channel on YouTube that will amplify some of these undercovered voices and try and push them up. I think the trust one is really hard to address. I think there are increasingly people who are finding ways to work out which social media to trust. They do that algorithmically, so things like a tool being developed by a group called USAID called Swift River, and they do it by looking the same way we trust other people. We trust people who we've listened to before, who've told us good things before, who'll come back and talk to us again the next time we have a question, versus people who are a single source that we will never talk to again. And so I think if we start applying those in social media, it's also about our conversations as well, going to the second part of the question, or the second question.
Great. Ben?
Yeah, I think one way I would maybe address it is I think that there's sometimes a tension between narratives that appeal to a mass audience and deep, sophisticated policy messaging. And I think even from my own experience, it took me a couple of years just to understand the acronyms and some of the words that are used in these circles. And so I think when you're trying to reach massive amounts of new people, your message needs to be a little different. Now, one of the previous questions of lessons that we learned at Invisible Children, before you launch a global media campaign that's going to get 100 million views, your PR team needs to be more than one intern. So for us, it's been a scramble to get some other voices heard. We've done that recently. We made a part 2, Coney 2012 part 2, that's a lot more voices from the ground and a lot more follow-up videos that bring a lot more of those voices out as well.
John, do you want to wrap things up for us?
Well, let's remember that on the tech front, one of the fastest growing populations of smartphone users is in Africa, and that's true throughout Africa. People are starting to join the conversation. And it's also important for us to support the efforts and the agency of people who are joining the conversation under their own terms. One thing that I've been involved in is mentoring a group in the Nuba Mountains where people are hiding in caves and facing daily bombardment from the Khartoum regime, and yet they have laptops, they have video cameras, they have solar chargers, and we can converse, and they're sharing information, eyewitness reports, and visual evidence from the ground that we can then go and corroborate with satellite Sentinel project images. And so let's not assume, however dire the circumstances, that people don't have their own agency and ability to join the tech conversation. People are very innovative in Africa and in places where there are emerging crises around the world.
Yes, and we're going to have a final word from our board member.
I just wanted to say that when I accepted the offer to join the board, I said that our participation in the board was going to be judged on 4 bases. First of all, whether we were establishing time-bound goals. Secondly, whether those goals were measured and monitored on a regular basis. Third, whether we were expanding financial and human resources for this issue. And fourth, whether we were identifying individuals who would be accountable, personally accountable, for the actions to take place under the board. I would invite all of you to hold the entire board to those same standards.
Thank you. That seems an appropriate note to conclude on.